I wanted to mention that we're creating a surprise panel for certain reasons, where we brought Bev Harris in from Black Box Voting and Eric Lazarus here from Accurate, and I think it would be great, before we go into the general panel, if each of you share a little bit about whatever, and also Eva Waskell we brought in as well. And Eva's been involved with election security work for a long time and has been a great source of help for me. Thank you so much for how you've opened me up to know how to deal with things. And she has, I do want to say a word more about you, Eva. You have an incredible ability to empathize. And I want, again, to emphasize how much to create true political change, empathy is an incredibly important part of the whole thing. And one of the things that got me, when I've been in this difficult area of election integrity for a long time, and I want to let you know that what I learned about how to empathize, which I used to help save my own life and make it better, rather, has enabled me. I actually sometimes feel liked by opposing groups, which is very interesting, and I've mediated. So, but it's also helped me, if I can understand the needs of somebody who appears to disagree, then, and maybe I can express mine in a way that I can be heard more easily, then there can be a place of meeting. And one of the beautiful gifts that I got from becoming a teacher of nonviolent communication or compassionate communication, a system developed by a man named Marshall Rosenberg, is that if you can empathize with the needs of another and really understand it, and if you can express it in such a way that they can hear your own needs, and then you just wait there's an empathic understanding, I want to let you know that these solutions come forward that nobody expected. And that is what, you were talking about, Eric, to come from a place of understanding, appreciating also Elaine for her coming forward and empathizing with her own needs for safety, and whatever that people's needs are, we've all had those needs ourselves at one time or another. And so we happen to teach, by the way, compassionate communication, and we have some of our Sunrise Center flyers, and Sunrise is the founding 501c3 under which the Grace Institute is formed. And we've got them there, and if you want to be on our mailing list, we can let you know about this wonderful system of communication that actually was what made me able to get Barbara Boxer to stand up, as I understood what her needs were. In 2004, I knew she was really worried about the machines. I had heard from one of her friends, and what she needed, and I was already well networked within, was she needed support from Ohio. She felt alone in California, worried in general about Ohio, and she needed support and connection. And so together with Jesse Jackson and Susan Truitt of Case, Ohio, I kind of understood it, and I want to offer to you this idea that you can. It's very interesting difference to tell, as opposed to telling a politician or an election official what you think they ought to do. Ask them at some point, if you think they're even leaning a little bit, what would you need to feel more comfortable doing this? And that's what I did with Barbara Boxer. And what she needed was support and connection with Ohio, which I provided with Stephanie Tubbs Jones from the Congress. So, I just invite you to do that, because her aides in her office said to me, and later, it wasn't the 10,000 letters asking her to stand up and protest the election that changed. It was meeting her needs. And that's what this wonderful system teaches. So I just wanted to give a little plug for what's made my life easier. So, yeah?
In line with that, I've now had a couple of election officials express confusion. So we have this expensive certified computer systems that are supposed to count votes, and now we're supposed to use this uncertified system? You know, how does it make any sense to have the uncertified system as a check on the certified system? Why would that make any sense? So what might be the kind of thing that people would want to say to help the election official who seems to be expressing honest confusion about why this makes sense?
Well, the one thing I sort of left out from tonight when I was giving a presentation was the importance of redundancy. And I flew in from Champaign-Urbana earlier today, and I'm really glad that there were 2 altimeters or more on the airplane. If there are 2 altimeters, then if one goes bad, at the very least, the pilot knows that there's disagreement and is going to look to some other source to find out which is correct. We're used to that idea. We all understand the importance of backup systems, the importance of redundancy, and that's what this is. It's not saying that the primary system is wrong. It's saying it's really hard to tell if the primary system is giving you the correct result unless there's a redundant system that's giving you a check on it. It's that simple.
Do anybody else have good answers to that question?
Yeah, I'm thinking.
That question came up at the Marin County Election Advisory Committee, and it focused on open source. And they're trying to describe that. I'd be interested in hearing your 30-second comment or explanation for that. We had 2 speakers at the advisory committee to talk about open source. And of course, when you start talking about the licensing, which is really the key, trying to put that concept into the 5-word sentence, 1 paragraph, to get them away from the certified, uncertified system paradigm. The redundancy, I think, is easy to understand, but a key part of this is understanding the benefits of open source. So if either of you have any suggestion for how to explain that. I referred them to Wikipedia and gave them a few other, key URLs.
Which is open source, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Before I address that, I just wanted to say a few more words about Eva, because I only met her through mail and phone, some months ago now, and she's encyclopedic in her knowledge of these election integrity issues and what's been going on. And she's been toiling in the vineyards for, I'm not sure how many years, but many, many, many years. And I think she's an example of one of those people who sort of sits in the background but is actually moving things forward. And I hope she gets credit for that.
Hey.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, yes. Open source, not to get too philosophical, I think it just is not something that fits with our current dominant paradigm. But,
unfortunately.
But the open source, it dates to an MIT student named Richard Stallman, who decided that it was unethical to produce something that he wouldn't share with other people. And so he's actually at the extreme end of things, but he decided that that was simply unethical, and that the software that he developed was something that he wanted to be as useful as possible. And so he formed an organization called the Free Software Foundation. He's the developer of a very extensive editing tool in computers called Emacs. And he formed an organization, the Free Software Foundation, and many people have developed versions of software that is simply free for anyone to use. And it's hard for people to understand that sometimes. Our system is capitalist. Our system is used to the idea that you want to hold on to something until somebody pays you for it. And with software, with something that is easy to duplicate, that can be duplicated at no cost at all, you can give it away. I mean, as long as you've made money developing it, or as long as you've been able to develop it without the need for making money, you can give it away. And it's no loss to you, and it's a benefit to everyone else. What happens with open source software is because other people can look at what you've done, they can improve it, and then they can give it away again. And so what's happened is over the years, some personalities have come along, some brilliant people with personalities that are suited to this, and they have developed complete operating systems. So Linux was developed by, I will not remember his nationality.
Linus Torvalds.
Linus.
Yes. Well, I don't have a Finnish
Yeah,
accent.
so
but-
Linus Torvalds developed the what's now an operating system kernel, and he had a personality that was able to draw other people in to flesh out the system, and that was combined with a great deal of stuff that was developed by the Free Software Foundation. But it's a somewhat different model. It's a model based on sharing, and it actually fits very much with the nonviolent communication theme. It's a system that is based on sharing rather than ownership. And people are trying to help move the ball forward rather than to hold on to the ball. That's open source.
Can I jump in 1 second here? I think you have to consider the marketing parts of what you're telling people. And you need to figure out which words you're going to use, and you need to use them more consistently when you're talking to people. And you don't have to do focus groups or anything to find out which words work best. But you probably could ask 100 of your friends as you try to explain it to them what you're doing, and you'll find that certain words work a lot better than other words. And I think as a group up here, if you spend a half a day doing that, I think you'd be really moving yourselves a lot. I think that was your question, Eric. I'm not sure, but it's kind of like, how do we talk about what we've done in such a way that people get it right away, which is huge.
I did recently ask an election official in a very important county on, what would it be like for him if the technology that he used in his election were freely redistributable open source technology so that he could buy support from whoever he wanted to, independent consultants, IBM Global Services, nonprofit organizations, that he wouldn't be limited as he is now if he buys something from Sequoia, he has to get the support from Sequoia, and then he has to be worried about pissing off Sequoia if he reports a bug, or something like that. And he immediately saw the value of having an open source solution where he could buy support wherever he wanted to. So election officials are aware that if there were open source voting equipment, that it would provide benefit, it would empower them to buy support where they wanted to, buy ballot printing where they wanted to, and not be in this terrible locked-in position that they're in right now.
One quick addition. What you were seeing, what I was presenting, that was running on Linux. That was not running on MS Windows or the Mac OS. That was all, the presentation was all on open source software.
Mm-hmm. If I could just say, though, the core issue isn't open source or not open source, because open source in and of itself doesn't give us the transparency that we really need. When you boil it all the way down to the problems with the way elections have evolved in the United States to be run now, it has to do with, are the citizens able to exert sovereignty over their government, which they pay for and they formed? And you can't exert sovereignty over something you can't see. And if you can't see how your government empowered itself to be, then you lose sovereignty to whoever it is that controls that process. Now, open source advocates will say, oh yes, but then everybody can see open source. There are advantages to it, such as you don't get them saying you can't see stuff because it's proprietary. But the fundamental principle behind freedom of information law is not that a certain subset of society can see it, but that it's simple enough, as Mitch pointed out, that every person can see it and understand it. So a lot of people aren't aware of this, but Germany in 2009 issued a ruling that without need for special expertise, citizens must be able to authenticate each essential step in their public elections. Now, moving forward with what is each essential step, there's 4 essential steps, really. Any one of those 4 can cause the democracy or the democratic election to collapse. The first one is who can vote, the voter list. Who did vote, which is the participating voter list. The chain of custody and the count. Each of those 4 things has to be something the public can see and authenticate for the public to retain sovereignty over their government, which is an inalienable right and it is an essential component of freedom itself. So some of this doesn't, open source is an important component for that, as is paper ballots. But as Eva has said, I think I really, really like the way she phrased it. What is going to happen to recover the public ability to have public controls over its own elections is a suite of solutions. There's not going to be a magic wand where we just run in here and say, ah, we have the Trachtenberg system and it's going to solve every problem there ever was. But it is meaningful and effective at solving some problems. And eventually, as if we can look at these core problems and say we need to make sure that these 4 essential processes are things the public can see and authenticate, we will develop a suite that really of solutions that is effective, I think.
Was voter list participation?
It's
What was it, the voter list?
It's on
the
your-
participation?
Oh, yeah,
That
I
list is
put
on
it
your
in almost
website.
everything, but yeah, 4 essential things. Who can vote? The voter list. Who did vote? The participating voter list. Chain of custody and the count.
Oh, good, I got it.
And if you kind of apply that litmus test to various solutions that are suggested, it actually becomes pretty clear which ones are meaningful and which ones may be an interesting idea but don't really move the ball forward. I'm here because this is meaningful, what they're doing, and this moves the ball forward.
Yes? What?
Chain of custody and vote by mail.
Oh, yeah.
It's really exclusive, I think.
Vote by mail is something that needs to be rolled back. It needs to be need only. There's no way around that. The reason is, if you look at the 4 issues, it's not just that who can vote, who did vote. Vote by mail conceals who did vote from the public. There's no way around it. And they've got various systems they claim will work, but the bottom line is insiders can control who did vote. It's not the signatures that don't match, it's the signatures that do, where the possibility for inside fraud is the greatest. And when I started saying this about vote by mail a couple of years ago, people didn't want to hear it because they love their vote by mail. But let me tell you, I started saying, watch out, it's the signatures that do match. What they will be doing is culling through the voter history list for the voters who are irregular voters and voting for them. Lo and behold, not 3 months later, 11 officials were indicted in New Jersey. 2 of the 17 counties were caught doing exactly that. The problem with vote by mail is it conceals who actually did vote. And it's a nice thing to have people like it, but I really think that it's very, very difficult to exert either chain of custody or control over who actually did vote with vote by mail. Unpopular thing to say in many circles.
We do it online.
Even worse.
There's a question.
You know, that I don't know if that was a joke or not. The one thing that happens, I think there might still be an assumption that people who are opposed to things like online voting, which is about the worst possible thing, or ATM-style voting, there's still some assumption that people like that are scared of computers, or they're Luddites, they don't believe in computers. What's actually the case is the really brilliant computer scientists who work on cryptography and who work on security, they're the ones who are most horrified by the idea of internet voting. They're the ones who are most horrified by the idea of paperless ATM-style voting. In Washington, D.C., there was just a a doomed from the start experiment with online voting, and you may have heard about it on TV. But Professor Alex Halderman of yet another thing I can't remember, thank you, of the University of Michigan, and a group of students was able to not only break in, but break in by multiple routes and get the complete list of voters and their passwords who had been registered to immediately follow that experiment with real live online voting. And this was a system that was set up, it was about to go into service. And they were sort of pressured to do a test. Actually, I think Pam Smith of Verified Voting was one of the people imposing that pressure. And she's right in the front row. And, you know, DC, like so many groups, were convinced they had it covered. And what they found out was they were nowhere near close to having it covered. So people who know a lot about computers know how hard this sort of thing is, how hard it would be to make internet voting happen. And they say, come back in 10 years. Come back in 10 years and maybe we can talk.
But essentially, and this is very important, internet voting centralizes control and conceals the process from the public. It's a non-starter for any democratic system.
It's essentially as problematic as purely, electronic touchscreen voting machines, except that you're making the attacks accessible to everyone on the planet who has an internet connection. So it's as bad as the other, but then multiplied even more extreme. So the attack surface is just indefinitely large.
And some of the attacks were from Iran and China.
Oh, and by the way, the U.S. government, at least according to the conference I went to on UOCAVA voting, that is overseas voting, especially for the military, is entirely committed to doing it, even though some of the most sophisticated computer security experts in the world were saying things like, guidelines for internet voting is like guidelines for drunk driving. There's one guideline. Don't do it. Right?
Well, and in addition, the internet voting for the troops, I've talked to somebody who was formerly up there with the national security stuff, and it basically gives away the position of the troops and some of your prized personnel to any other nation where the cables run through. So it's really, what's really dismaying is where you start seeing these political movements to get these things with, and the people honestly seem to have no clue of how high risk it is. And there's that old adage, if it works, don't fix it. Well, this is a fix we really don't want.
Yes?
Although overseas voting right now, as it does for soldiers, is completely broken. I mean, they don't get well represented. But we do need to put, do schedules in place so ballots go out to them earlier and they have more time for ballots to get back and things like that. We do need to find a way to meet the needs of troops, but it isn't with internet voting.
Not only the troops, there are also 3 to 6 million expats overseas that are left out of that conversation that also need to have their voice heard.
I just wanted to mention before we go on, there are some questions that I haven't had a chance to read, and some people aren't here and some people are, and I would want to make sure to answer the questions of the people who are still here first. So I think maybe you could raise your hand if you want.
That man in the back has had his hand up
Okay.
for a long time.
So man in the back.
Lori, one time before I'd asked you about why the politicians aren't more, interested in this, and you gave a good answer. I wanted to share that with people, because that's the first thought that comes to my mind. Is like, this is so critical to our democracy. Why aren't the politicians screaming about this issue and clamoring to get these things all, squared away? And you had a good answer.
Okay, I'm happy to share it. It's my elephant in the room story. I've contemplated and meditated on this for a very long time. And first of all, if I'm a politician and I want you to go to the polls, do I want you to know about a possibility of election fraud or error? Absolutely not. No, because I want you to come and feel that your action is meaningful. If I'm trying to raise some money from you for my campaign, do I want you to know about possible error or election fraud? No. Will you write as large a check to me thinking that your vote will be in the toilet? No. All right, then, if I'm a media company and I want to make money, I want those Republican and Democratic millions to roll into my television program, do I want to indicate that there's anything that could be wrong, possibly? Because I want that money, so I want to be in support of all this Republican and Democratic and whatever else kind of election. So I don't want to, don't talk to me about conspiracy theorists. Get out of here. And that's the same for print media, too, and other things. The only place where questions have come up, as far as I've noticed, is more on the internet. Then, additionally, this is even more problematic. If I'm the Lewis Mitofsky exit poll company, and I'm hired, if I'm a media company, I hire the Mitofsky exit poll company to give me sort of a heads up on what's happening, because I want to be the first station to announce the results, all right, And so we all sort of chip in together, but I'm watching those, and so, and that's the company that's hired year after year after year. All right, so what happens is I hire them, and then if I'm the Mitofsky exit poll system, unlike in other countries where exit polls are sometimes used to show some truth, I want to be rehired every other year by the media company. So I have literally talked to people who've been in conversation with Mitofsky. I kind of massage the figures, they call it reconcile, the figures to meet more accurately the vote totals. And if something seems skewed, as it did in the Kerry Bush election, we create some analyses. So, and then I have to also say that if I'm a Secretary of State or an election official, I don't want a registrar, I don't necessarily want to look like anything's bad on my watch, because you might not vote for me again, all right? So here's this big elephant in the room, and everybody's going around it as though it doesn't exist. And that was why I created this idea of this award, because I wanted to break the cycle.
Good.
That's my little story. Yes.
Comment was made that the appointed registrars have to please their 5 bosses every Tuesday, the Board of Supervisors. You took a risk in trying this system out. The people in Washington, D.C. who did the right thing and really for the first time opened up their innovative system to a public test, they're almost all, the top 4 people, have their heads on the line to get fired.
Wow, really?
They did the right thing. And so I think in trying to understand, empathize with these people, they're sitting there saying, I don't want to stick my neck out. How can we help them to take the risk? How can we frame the situation for them to take that risk, to stick their neck out, to do the right thing?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure about some of the premises. I think, in fairness, I think DC made a decision to go ahead with something, and they only agreed to the test because they were under extreme pressure, and they were moving to a new system that, this was the way that these votes were going to be counted. This wasn't a backup. This wasn't a second, and I mean, they do deserve credit for finally opening it up to testing, but my understanding is that it was somewhat begrudging and somewhat late. And so, yes, they do get credit for having finally opened it up. But the larger point that you raise, if we can leave DC aside, is that we really have to be forgiving of the fact that people aren't perfect. And this is something that applies way beyond elections. But if government officials are only going to be screamed at for anything that they do that's beyond the normal, then they're never going to do anything beyond the normal. And so I think maybe a little less screaming and a little bit more help. And it really amounts very much to what Lori was saying. What can I do to make you more comfortable with this? What can I do to help you to improve your system? And one of the things that we found in Humboldt, and I'm sure Carolyn will back me up on this, one of the things, I mean, essentially what Carolyn did was she opened things up and she found that her official count was off by 197 ballots. And what ended up happening was she became the most popular elected official in Humboldt County. Because instead of having the 197 ballots be hidden, she was exposing them. So she was saying to people in Humboldt County, it's more important that I get you the right numbers than that I try to hide my mistake. And we need to support people in doing that, and we also need to elect people who have that mindset.
Another part of this problem, another part of this is the procedures. We have a Norman Rockwell vision of elections in this country. And if you've read David Campbell's book and other volumes I have of the history of this system, or Joseph P. Harris's assessment in 1933, you will see that the election process is a sausage factory. It's imperfect. The processes are imperfect. The people are imperfect. They get tired. Human error does enter into that. And so if we start with the premise that the infrastructure and the mechanics of democracy are a sausage factory, and then we have people with political courage like Carolyn who say, all right, come on in and see my sausage factory, and let's find out what's working, what's not, and let's improve it. And you do that eternally, without stop. It's an incremental, never-ending process. But when we start with the false perception, the illusion that our elections are this Norman Rockwell version, we are setting ourselves up for trouble, and also for the people who are running elections and are afraid to take that risks.
Suzanne?
Carolyn mentioned earlier the difference between elected and appointed ROEs, which I must admit I didn't know existed. And it sounds like we should all be pushing to elect our ROEs.
Yes, that sounds great.
Because otherwise we get bureaucrats that really answer to no one.
Another reason that I believe registrars of voters should be elected is that this poor person who is an appointed registrar of voters may be feeling pressure from the 5 people, their board of supervisors who appointed them. On the other hand, the only pressure that the elected official can feel is from, in Humboldt County, the 80,000 people that elected them. And I'll tell you that partly the reasons that that Mitch mentioned, that I just wanted to run my office the way I think I would like anybody to run that office, gets the respect of the people there. And if I can do that openly, then the people of Humboldt County are going to become aware that I am trying to do that. And, there will be how many write-ins were against me in June, Mitch?
I don't have that at my fingertips.
So there are people out there that think that, boy, that Cernan, she's wasting our time or whatever. Not everybody in Humboldt County thinks I'm doing a good job at what I am, but I think I got well over 90% of the votes. I was.
Wow.
No.
Wow.
I was unopposed. I think he was in the area of 96. But I think any elected official would settle for 96%.
I'd just point out one other thing. It wasn't a bed of roses for Carolyn during the course of time that we've known each other. We met in 2003. There were election integrity people in our county who attacked her fairly harshly throughout that period of time, and unfairly in many of the instances, but it was because they had a predisposed mindset that she was the enemy. I think, and that can be a tendency, I think, amongst all of us, and people who tend to think that the system may not be working properly, is to just assume that, and reading into her actions, things that weren't there. And it was kind of interesting for me because I knew some of these people outside of my relationship with Carolyn, and I knew that she was working toward the right directions, but they had a feel, basically they took a pretty hard line that there was one and only one way that we would have election integrity, and that was hand count and hand count only. And I knew that we were working towards something that would get there and would work with Carolyn's. It was a matter of recognizing that there was things that would work for her, and given the system, given the finance, whatever. And in the end, it was not until the 2008 presidential election, when we did prove that this would work, that pretty much all of that criticism is abated. And I think just something to watch out for. As I don't know if you're all from Marin, you may have other jurisdictions that you're in, but don't approach your registrar or clerk as the enemy just because you assume they're the enemy.
I want to mention, too, that what's happening here in California, and particularly in Humboldt and in Yolo, is important nationwide. I do my work in all 50 states. And I know, Carolyn, you were called upon to voice your expertise in Colorado at one point. Colorado courts have decided that even the candidate can't see her own ballots or ballot images whatsoever. New Hampshire, where we have the presidential primary, has a law that it is prohibited to look at the ballots unless under certain prescribed circumstances. But ballots are not a public record and are specifically excluded as a public record. And that's the case in many places. And they justify it by all kinds of verbal gymnastics. But what's so important about what you guys are doing is those justifications are sort of melting away, because you're able to say, well, gee, that didn't happen to me. And of course, Florida, one of the good things about Florida is anybody can go examine the actual ballots for paying $10 an hour to sit there and examine them. It's a bit cumbersome, and I think this has actually got transparency advantages that make it more usable to the average citizen than sitting there and counting them one by one. But there are a lot of states right now that will claim that what you guys are doing is impossible and destroys all kinds of terrible things. But yet you're proving it does work.
In fairness, I just want people to understand what the complaints are from people who are concerned with what we're doing. And obviously I don't agree with them, but they're not completely irrational, and I want people to understand that it's not just a bunch of people saying, oh no, we can't try this new thing. Exposing ballots, or even exposing what are called cast vote records, the pattern of votes on a particular ballot, has the potential. It's a theoretical potential, but it has the potential to impact on voter privacy. It enables some fairly sophisticated attacks that personally I don't expect are going to happen in the real world, but there are attacks, for example, called pattern voting, where somebody, by voting a particular sequence of down-market candidates, can signal to an upmarket candidate that they voted in the way that that candidate wanted them to. And there are people who are concerned about that theoretical possibility. Now, is Kevin chomping at the bit yet? Yeah, Kevin. Let Kevin push the button, and he'll explain why in California that's not a problem.
Well, this consideration came before Carolyn and I when we were brainstorming in the period probably 03, 04. And it was brought to our... I ran this by a professor, and his objection was, well, I like it, but that would enable vote coercion or vote buying, which I said thank you and thought about it. And we talked about it. So, well, wait a minute. We have absentee ballots in California. If I were the local mafioso or company boss, whoever, and wanted you to vote a certain way, would I have you bring in your absentee ballot, say, sign it there, I'll mark it up, here's your money, or, I won't break your kneecap. Or will I first contact you, say, I want you to vote this way, I want you to mark all of these special patterns or put this little insignia over here on the ballot, and then I'm going to look at all these images. I'm going to go through 100,000 images and find those. And then after that, have you come back and pay you off or break your kneecap. I'll go find you to break the kneecap, I suppose. It's ridiculous. I mean, yes, it's possible. It's certainly possible. It's hypothetically possible. But it's not probable. And it's really what I consider a hypothetical boogeyman. And what it does, I think, is it stops, if that's the concern, let's look at the real world. If you have absentee balloting, as we do in California, there's one other aspect to doing it with absentee versus doing it our way. If you do it absentee, there's absolutely no evidence this took place except the testimony of the parties involved. But if you do it using the Transparency Project, you're leaving forensic evidence that anybody can see. And they're going to start saying, hey, how come there's all these little smiley faces over in the right corner with an initial under them? And it's going to be obvious that something's afoot. So now, is that enough? Or?
I think they get it.
Yeah, but other countries.
This is not. I don't share that perspective. I view that yes, vote by mail ballots open us up to really terrible retail vote buying and intimidation. But sadly, publishing either cast vote records or pictures of the ballots, potentially, if it were done, in really large counties, particularly with a history of, would I recommend this for Chicago or something like that, where there's a long history of election manipulation that's well documented. People go to jail for it. I think there are potentially scary, large-scale intimidation schemes that could be done with this. And so if we can create ways of getting to this or even higher level of assurance without publishing either cast vote records or pictures of the ballots, we ought to be exploring those. Those are good research areas that people ought to be examining. That's my view.
And I guess my concern is that by focusing on the hypothetical, improbable, you say in Chicago maybe it's more probable. I would say in Chicago it's even far more probable that there's vote fraud that is unseen.
Right.
And without the sunlight, that making it possible for the people to view this fundamental document, the ballot. There's risks in a democracy. I mean, there's risks in life. But one of the risks in democracy is that, maybe you will sell your ballot, but it's illegal. Coercion's illegal. Those two things alone are incentive enough, I think, that there isn't a whole lot of vote buying and or vote coercion even taking place with absentee ballots. I think more likely the scenarios that Bev was talking about are where it's taking place. But there was a fellow in Chicago who tried to sell his ballot online. He got arrested. In your paper that the Brennan Center published in 2005, you talk about the number of vectors And the fact you discount the fact that vote buying is really that viable of a method because it involves so many people and the ability to contact that people, advertise, and exposure is highly likely. And yes, somebody will do it. I'm not saying it's a perfect world, but I think it's even more likely that a few people in the darkness will try to control and manipulate, thinking they can get away with it.
And we don't block human rights because a crime might be committed. It's two different things. It's a different type of crime to block the human right to sovereignty over our own government. That's a higher level crime than a lower level person trying to buy some votes.
Yes. Oh, I believe that.
And I guess my feeling is sort of let 100 flowers bloom. I'm aware of the concerns regarding release of the images. And my feeling is I don't want to see innovation in the field stopped because of those concerns. And I think there has to be some freedom to experiment. And that's what the Transparency Project represents. And if it turns out it's not a good solution, then it's an experiment that failed. But if it's not tried because of fears about what I think are some pretty esoteric attacks, then I think that would be a bigger loss.
I was just going to say that.
Mike?
I was just going to say, being one of the people that goes through and verifies things like write-in ballots in our county, I think it's a lot more possible that people could make some kind of a mark, particularly using the write-ins, that would identify belonging to an organization or something like that. And
No, I agree. Actually, the write-in is probably the easiest, but the argument's still the same.
One of the things that I've seen discussed at the conference in D.C., the ACRA conference, is things like randomizing parts of the image. Like when you drill down on census data, they randomize data once you get to the block level so that you can identify individual people based on the data, and similarly taking the images and kind of mismatching different races from different ballots when you post images up to be looked at. So that all 100% of every image is there, but they aren't all entirely images of unique ballots.
We don't have too much more time, and I want to make sure that whoever hasn't had a chance to ask a question gets answered, and maybe we can do all that are left. Yes, Alex.
I had a brief comment and question. It kind of was in regards to what you were saying, Laurie, about the elephant in the room. It seems pretty obvious from human history that people change when there is, enough incentive to do so, and the balance of incentives is more for positive action than the perverse incentives. So, however much we appeal to people, and I think that your example also of asking Barbara Boxer what her needs were is a way to really identify the person's core motivations and speak to that as a way to change that balance.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a technical question for you, Mitch. In terms of the OCR software, given that every ballot in an election is the same, it seemed to me that you were reading the whole ballot fresh every time.
No.
Okay.
First of all, it's the same within a precinct, but not or a sub precinct, but not every ballot is the same. So what the system does is it looks at the barcodes, and when it sees a new barcode, it does OCR the first time. And in this particular election, what we did was we fed it initially with the ballot print files that had been sent to the printer, and generated the templates. The OCR reading all took place off of those print files, and then the subsequent files were done at lower resolution, and we used the same OCR, matching it up based on the barcode.
You're making a digital representation of the ballot as a PDF, correct?
JPEG, but yeah.
Okay. So you've got a digital document, if you will, and that's similar to like other voting systems, although, I mean, they use different kind of way of doing representations. those other voting systems, Sequoia, et cetera, whatever, they can be hacked. Your system can be hacked. To create
Absolutely.
an image that everything subsequent, everything after that is going by that image, what's on that image. If it's
Absolutely.
altered, then you've got election fraud.
Absolutely. And that's why I was saying that you need to have a stage where you're checking the images against the paper.
But that's right, doing a hand count, like a 1% or something like that. Well, doesn't that kind of like put you on the same par as all these other voting systems? That you have to go back to the original paper ballot to check your system?
Well, I'm really curious to hear what Eric has to say, actually.
No,
and
they're
then
not
I'll
on a par
respond.
with the other systems. They put themselves in a much better position to do a risk-limited audit than, for example, they're putting a unique identifier on that ballot as they're printing. Let me finish. Let me finish. Actually, let me.
You still have to go back to the original physical paper ballot.
Right. They're in a way better position to do it than any voting system that I'm aware of currently certified. Right. In that, yes, they ought to do it. Right. They ought to have a risk limiting audit where you randomly sample the right number of ballots and you have a lot of people there looking at them. I mean, but they are in a position to do it because they've got the cast vote records to compare it to, and they have numbers that identify those ballots uniquely. So they're well positioned to do that in the future, and I'll be talking to them about doing it.
Yeah, but all these systems, including yours, has to go back to that physical ballot. And inasmuch as the elections departments thwart your efforts to go back to that physical ballot, it's like, why not just hand count the damn things
Well-
to begin with?
Well, let's talk about the time involved and the accuracy
Yeah, I know.
factor.
Well, excuse me.
Santa Rosa
Listen to
County, just a
her.
second.
You just asked a question. You just asked a question. Now listen, if you would. Thanks.
I believe it was Santa Rosa County, Colorado, that several years ago did a study of hand counting and employed at least 3 different groups to perform that hand count in 3 different ways. And they
Wow.
found out that I believe it was 80% of the time, the 3 groups counting the same ballots in 3 different ways disagreed with each other. So again, I think there is a place in our society for a machine that can go +1, +1, +1, +1. And I think this is it. Because programmed honestly and correctly and designed correctly in the ballot, and Bev is fully aware of the things that can go wrong. When it's designed correctly, your ballots are designed correctly, your counting program is designed correctly, and it is counting accurately, it's an unbiased way to, we don't have Democrats and Republicans, we have a machine doing the count. And then we have a second and freestanding system from that, in our case, separate and freestanding, that is running them through with a totally different set of software, the same ballots that were counted before, imposing a number on them long after they've been at the polls, so they're not in the same order. You cannot identify from order what whose ballot that might be. So it's imposing an identifier on each ballot, so that if Kevin has a question about this vote in the 2nd Supervisor's District, or these 80 votes in the 2nd Supervisor's District, he'd say, I'd like to talk to you about ballot number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and number 8205, and give me the numbers. I will go get that paper, and we'll talk about it. We'll look at the paper and look at the image that you did. But Mitch, I want you to talk about the signing of the...
Well, yeah, there's I mean, the images can be digitally signed to confirm that they're not altered after we touch them. But that's the point that I really wanted to make, is this is a second system.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
you're talking about as if this were used instead of. And what I'm saying is use this in addition to.
Right.
And so your challenge your challenge, oh, and there's one other thing, which is that this system doesn't need to be reprogrammed between elections because it's just reading the ballots by OCR. So the opportunity to defraud an election by creating a ballot definition file that flips votes, that's gone. If this system has worked for 6 elections or however many elections, and you can confirm that it's the same software and it hasn't received any additional information about the layout of the ballot, I'm not going to say it can't be defrauded, but I am going to say it's harder.
Well, I would like to quickly just say, I go to places where there's fraud, and I've been eyewitness to election fraud in at least 4 situations. And I will tell you that if I was, yes, it can be done at a high level, like China can come in. Usually election fraud is done by people who are not rocket scientists, and they leave all kinds of breadcrumbs for everyone to follow. And I think they will really hate this system because they won't be able to figure out what to do. The level of clumsiness in election fraud in the United States where it is done is really mind-boggling. Also, this is not the be-all and end-all and only. This is something that can be done now, inexpensively, that's meaningful.
Would you please define OCR?
Sorry, that's optical character recognition, so that when the names appear on the image, we can convert it into, the names that were typed.
I wanted to respond to the same question, and Mitch covered it, is that, and I got the impression you were talking, this is the single and only system. But you would have to hack first the certified system, and then you would have to hack this system.
Well, excuse me, but a point was made that this would be a good system to implement for a county because it would reduce the expense. Where would the reduction in expense go? If we
reduce
kept
the expense relative to, in California, relative to the mandatory 1% manual hand count ritual, which is very hard to observe and not a very good check. So if this plus this kind of single ballot audit style of auditing were used instead of that procedure, it could save money in every election, every time, I believe. We'll be getting you exact numbers in about a year.
I wanted to finish, though, with regard to your point, well, why don't we just count the damn ballots by hand anyway? I think counting them by hand is a good method. I think it is expensive, it's labor intensive. There's different reasons registrars resist it. It was interesting, I listened to a radio interview Bev did with Bruce Funk, who was a registrar in Utah, who made his, they were basically forcing him to use a Diebold TSX machine. And in the interview, he revealed that when he'd become the registrar, they were using hand counts throughout the county. And he switched the county from hand counts because he saw too much basic fraud. So my response to hand counting the ballots is, yes, that's good, but you still want to use a transparency project. You still want to take that paper ballot and have a redundant system that's independent of the other system. And that way you have the method of detecting if somebody was trying to cheat. It would discourage the guys out in the outlying precinct from trying to fake it and knowing that somebody else will be looking at the ballots later.
Oh, sure. What they do with hand count systems is they either use different ballots or they write down the wrong number. That's the simplest thing. We saw that in the New Hampshire primary. They have about 150 locations that hand count in New Hampshire. And they would just write down the wrong number. Everybody could see the count, they just didn't see what they wrote down. So there's many different ways to go at things. But I guess my litmus test is, does it open up more information to the public? Is it meaningful? This meets that test in a very meaningful way, and it can be done now and cheaply. But can it be manipulated? Yeah, but if I was going to manipulate this system, if I was a county that was corrupt, I would substitute the ballots. I wouldn't go about hacking their thing. I would just stick other ballots in there.
We are going to have to close. I've been getting little notices up here, but I want to say this is an incredibly rich conversation, and this is going to be available by DVD. It's going to also be on the community channel here in Marin, It'll be created. There will be some YouTubes created out of it, and I invite you to stay in touch with the Grace Institute for Democracy and Election Integrity and Sunrise Center. And we have I don't know if there's no copies up here, but there's we have a little sheet of what we're offering and a website for December. But if you sign into the list back there, we will keep you informed of developments. And every single year, we're going to be doing different kinds of improvements that will have a big effect in California and a ripple effect elsewhere. And I've already been contacted by several states. So but
just wanted to say that if people catch election officials doing great things, can they send you nominations?
Absolutely, absolutely, and we have a nominating committee, and then we will be looking at that. And we started with California because originally we thought we'd have the blessings of the League of Women Voters, but they got caught up in their slower pace of doing things. We had several people who are members who are part of the committee, but actually I have my eye on a number of people, including Ian Sancho and others that I've really admired. But I want to say that this whole discussion is alive with all of you right here, right now. So you are actually a very important part of this whole equation, which is why I'm inviting you to stay in contact, to put your name down, and to be a part of shaping our democracy. And we will have these DVDs that you can get for a small amount of money through us that you can send to people. And let's create, a 100th monkey effect. Let's light a candle and I'll create lots of candles and a lot of light. And I can't answer another question, but if you have a comment that's brief.
You are doing a press release.
We have done quite a few.
And maybe you want to send it to everybody who gave you their email address tonight?
Yeah.
So they would have the words that you use to explain what it is.
We'll have that. And also I do want to let you know that both Peter B. Collins is going to do a podcast tomorrow with Carolyn Cernich, and is also open to others, like Tom, if you want to join, or whoever. And then Norman Solomon in January is going to do another. So if you stay tuned to us, and you can become part of the development of this new shift. And I want to really thank you all in closing for being here. I want to thank you all, award winners and other election people, and Bev and Eva and Eric. And I really celebrate that we're part of creating something new and something that we're all going to love.